All right. One bad thing about white oak, stupid heavy. All right, the client has approved our stain samples and design samples, so now we're getting started on building the outer case for our mid-century modern nightstand. So we're starting out by just milling up the lumber. All right, so since these guys are crazy heavy and the edge is really just a rough sawn board there, instead of trying to heft this whole thing across the jointer, I'm going to get it started by doing a cut with a track saw, and then once I get it milled down to its final thickness, I'll then hit it across the jointer, but this will save me a lot of grunting. All right, I've yet to invest in a longer track for the track saw, so I'm gonna have to do it in a couple stages, but to get a straight line from end to end without wasting a bunch of materials, I'm just gonna use my level as a straight edge to mark that out, and then I'll line my track up to that. All right, and then I'll have to cut it this side, then move the track up and cut the other half. All right, now that I have a nice straight edge ripped on this to where it can ride against the fence without getting pushed around and getting pinched in between the blade, it's much safer to rip it to its final width on the table saw. All right, so these strips that I cut off at the table saw are wide enough for the rails that I need for the structure of the nightstand. So I'm going to cut them to length and then resaw them in half, and that will give me my material thickness I need. All right, I'm getting ready to mill up the material for the case for the nightstand. 8/4 white oak, so it is really heavy. So it's going to be a little bit of a workout to get these milled to the right thickness. So I'm going to set up a little bit of a safety rest here at the jointer to help me get the board started safely. All right, I'm setting my jack stand about 1/4 inch lower than the top of the jointer table. I want to make sure my boards are always referencing off the top of the jointer table to ensure they come out nice and flat and not be influenced by this. This is just to help me make sure that I have a good starting point to rest the board on to help me get it safely started into the joint. Since these boards are so big, heavy, and wieldy, I am going to make sure I take the time every so often to wax the table to keep everything moving nice and smoothly. All right, you might not be able to see on camera the two nails or chunks of metal that I've uncovered here. I feel like Matt Cremona. Still got a fair amount of thickness removed, so I'm pretty sure that will go away. All right, now that I got it planed down to thickness, I'm going to do one last final cleanup pass at the jointer just to make sure everything fits really nice and tight together and there's no gaps before I glue up. All right, I spent some time with the jointer getting these boards to fit nice and tight together so the seams pretty much disappear. So to glue them up now, I'm going to use some floating tenons here between the joints, more for alignment just to make sure they stay flat and don't slide back and forth during glue up. The glue is plenty strong to hold it together. These guys are just to help me keep it all aligned while I clamp it all together. All right, so it looks like the battery in my lav mic died while shooting this section, but basically what I'm saying here is that I need to cut this into 3 chunks so they're more manageable. And I'm going to do perfect 90-degree cuts using the track saw, or at least as perfect as I can get them. And the reason why I'm not setting the track saw to 45 degrees is because there's always a little bit of play in the track saw, so it never comes out to be a perfect 45, unlike my table saw that has a dead perfect 45. So I'm going to separate out the chunks and then cut the 45-degree miters at the table saw and then assemble it from there. That way I have perfect miters instead of kind of perfect miters. And since I'm only moving a saw blade worth of material on that 90-degree cut, because when I go to cut my 45, I'm going to line it right up to the top edge of that original cut. So I'm hardly taking out any wood there. So once I get it all glued together, the grain should flow very nicely with very little breaks from up the side, across the top, and down the other side. All right, so the ends aren't perfectly square, but now that I have a perfectly square 90-degree cut right here, I'm going to use the table saw now to use this 90-degree cut to reference off, to cut it to length, to cut the miter, and to cut this top piece to length and cut its miter, along with the other side. Right here I'm separating the other side that I hadn't cut with the track saw yet and the top piece. Alright, this is the side piece and I have the fence set up to cut it to its exact length. And I'm going to cut both side pieces using this setting so that way it's guaranteed that they'll be the exact same length. Alright, so my sides are going to be 29 inches tall. So I set the blade at 29 inches, and since this is 1.5 inches thick, I subtracted an 1.5 inches, and so moved the blade, or moved the fence over 1.5 inches. So I'm at 27.5, and so that should give me just a perfect cut right along this corner here at a 45. And I want to just be super careful with my measurements, because the more blade width you remove, the less likely the grain is going to match. So I'm just trying to remove just a blade width so I have a really good match. All right, so now for the top, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut it, turn it around, and cut the other side. And of course, I'm just going super nice and slow. This is some really tough wood. White oak is pretty dense and tough on the tools. So I'm just going slow and making sure I'm keeping solid pressure up against the fence, because the last thing I wanted to do is to walk away from the fence and turn into a frisbee and take off. All right, so for the front edge bevel detail, the client approved the 22.5 degree bevel. So to make sure that it stays accurate and it lines up at the mitered corners, I have a feather board in place here to help make sure everything stays tight to the fence. All right, so around the bottom edge is going to be a saw kerf decorative detail, and it needs to wrap around this bevel. So to hold this in position as I pass across the blade is going to be kind of awkward. So I built a little jig, have these little clamping fins on it to clamp it down so I can safely run it across there. Good. All right, and then for the other side, it has to run through backwards because it's, of course, the opposite end. All right, so now to do the decorative detail on the ends, I'm just going to stand it up here and clamp it to my miter gauge. Flip it over here. All right, we're going to reinforce the joint with some floating tenons. All right, so I'm not going to glue it up just yet. I'm just doing a test fit to make sure everything glues up nice and square and the miters are nice and tight. And then once I have my test fit together, I can take some measurements for the inner supports. All right, so now that we're moving on to the inner workings of the nightstand, this material here is what I resawed in half earlier, so I'm milling it down to its final size so I can get it cut to length. And then I'm also going to mill some material for the shelves. There's a little cubby hole at the top that is going to act as a shelf, so I'm going to mill some material for that as well. All right, so these two boards I'm gluing up is going to make the shelf at the top of the nightstand. The nightstand is going to have this little open cubby area, so this is the shelf for that. All right, I've measured the width of the inner opening of the nightstands and I set up a stop to that width. And so now I'm squaring up the material and cutting it all to length at the same time. And this is going to be the top shelf and the drawer dividers. So that way all the structure will be cut to the exact same width and everything will glue up nice and tight with no gaps between any of the parts and still have perfect miters at the top. All right, so for the supports between the drawers and the bottom support, I'm just going to build a simple web frame that is going to be put together with floating tenons. So I have a clamp down in my table so I have something to push on, and it's positioned so the end overhangs the bench just a little bit to give me plenty of room for the tool to get in there and do its thing. So it's just a super fast way of getting this done. All right, so this rail is going to get glued to the back of the cabinet, and then this rail is going to get glued to the front of the cabinet. And so you have all this possible wood movement here. So I'm going to glue a floating tenon into this side, but just stick the floating tenon in this side so that way as the cabinet expands and contracts, this can float but still give it some stability to keep the cabinet square and strong and all that good stuff. So let's get gluing it up. If you like this French cleat organization system, I have a video for that. You can check it out. Put a link somewhere. Make sure that's nice and flush. All right, so in the back of the nightstand, we're going to have a outlets to plug in, like an alarm clock or a lamp, and then some charging ports to charge your phone overnight. So I need to construct a little shelf for this to be installed into, so I need to cut some dados for that. So that's what I'm doing now. All right, and while I have the dado blade set up, I'm going to go ahead and cut this dado that is for the back of the little cubby. So this will allow the back of the cubby to expand and contract into that dado. All right, and then this rabbet is the rabbet on the back of the shelf that back will be glued to. All right, so this hole is for the electrical cords to pass through to the back to plug into our hidden outlet. And once I drill the hole, I'm going to take it over the router table and just gently round over the edge. All right, so this is where the outlet is going to be installed into the back of the cabinet. So I pre-drilled or hogged out some of the material that I don't need at the drill press, just to lighten the load on the router bit. And I'm going to tape down my template here. And then we'll use a pattern bit to cut it out. All right. All right, so I'm gonna have floating tenons to hold in my top shelf. And the top shelf will sit in here just like this. So to help me plunge my floating tenons, I've clamped this board down here. I've also marked out the locations, and this lip is going to give me a nice positive stop to hold my floating tenon cutter in place. All right, then I just worked my way down the piece and each time cut the template to its appropriate size, and then I use that template both on the left and right hand side of the cabinet, so that way it's guaranteed that these will be in exactly the same spot, so my case will end up nice and square. All right, then the last thing to do is to cut the corresponding mortises in the web frames. All right, so the outside is going to get the dark stain, and then the inside faces are going to be the natural wood, but this decorative saw kerf is going to be stained all the way around. So I'm just hand staining it with a brush to make sure I get it worked all the way down to the bottom of that groove, and then any excess that is spillaging out onto the outside edge here, or the outside face, I'll just sand off nice and smooth after it dries. All right, so I'm going to pre-finish the inside faces because it'll be a lot easier to apply the finish to those guys when the cabinet's apart than trying to spray finish into a little tiny box where the gun doesn't really fit. So to prevent any finish from getting on the areas where I'm going to apply glue, I'm just going to mask those areas off to protect them. All right, I'm getting ready to glue up all the parts, and I pre-finished the inner parts, so those are done, and I'm going to use this little corner clamping method to glue miters together to make sure I have a good, nice, tight miter. So this will be my clamping caul. Alright, it is time to get the case glued up, and I am going to use a slow set epoxy to do this assembly. I want to make sure I have plenty of time to get everything put together since there are so many parts and pieces to this assembly. So this slow set epoxy is going to have plenty of open time to allow me to get everything dialed in before the glue sets up. Alright, now it's time to start building the drawers, so I'm getting that material prepped. Alright, so now that I've resawn my pieces, the 1/2 inch thick piece is going to be the drawer sides, and the 1/8 inch slice I took off is going to be veneered onto the plywood substrate for the drawer bottoms. So that saves material, maximizes my material use, and also guarantees that my drawer bottoms are going to be in the same colorway as my drawer sides to help it all be homogeneous and stuff. Alright, I cut my drawer size to final length and width, and then I cut a dado along the bottom edge to accept the bottom. Alright, and before assembling the drawers, I pre-finished everything to make it easier, and I also taped off the joints to prevent the finish from getting on the joint areas because glue doesn't stick to finish very well. Alright, so to stain these, I'm going to use the same procedure I did on the sample that I made for the client. And so I have it all taped off, ready to go. I'm just going to work my base coat in and sand that back just like on the sample, stain it, and then clear coat it. Alright, so if you remember back to my stain matching video where I did the stain match for this project to match their bed, you may recall that there was not any talk about a glaze coat, so you're like, what's going on here? So after the client reviewed the sample, they decided they wanted the grain to pop a little bit more. So what I'm doing here is I'm working some black glazing into the grain of the wood, and so that's pushing it into the pores of the grain of the wood, and then I will sand it back after it dries, and that'll help make the grain of the wood really pop. And then once that dries, then I will put my stain coat over the top of that. And the reason why this was decided because this accentuation of the grain is going to show off the waterfall more, since the grain goes across the top and down the sides in one continuous fashion. It really shows that off. Alright, so I got it sanded back, so the only thing that's left in the deep pores of the grain is that initial glaze coat. Now I'm just going to brush on my final coat pretty liberally, let it soak in, and then wipe off the excess. All right, so again, I'm using one of my favorite undermount drawer glides. This is the Bloom Tandem system. If you want to know more about how I install these, I have a step-by-step video that I will link to that shows you exactly how I install them. All right, so I've transferred the holes from here to here to make a template. Did a test fit to make sure it's good. All right, to help align the drawer in the opening, I have a little spacer here, and that is the space of the reveal that I planned, and I'll use it on the right-hand side here just to bump the drawer up to help me hold it in position. I put a little glue on the back of that drawer front, and then I'll screw through the holes that I pre-drilled for the handle just to attach it to the drawer box, and that will stay there until the glue dries. And then once the glue dries, I'll take those screws out and attach the handle. And then I'll use the same spacer technique for the bottom drawer as well, spacing out between the drawers and along the side. All right, now that the glue is dry, I popped those initial screws out that were just holding the drawer front in place, and I'm attaching the handles. All right, and then the last final detail is to install this electrical charging outlet in the back of the cabinet. All right, and there we have our two-tone mid-century modern nightstands. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.